This demonstration will show you how to work with the mark making application process and the weighted line process that is involved for this next assignment. So I'm actually going to start first off with weighted line. Right? Weighted line is an ability for us to create value in a contour line drawing where we just start to transition sort of the plain line, okay, the very consistent line that's used in contour line drawing, sorry, and then to go back and begin to add the weight, which is going to give us that sense of value, sense of groundedness, and give some importance to some areas in that line drawing. This is sort of a nice component to add into any other type of value study, whether it's working with just blending or if it's working with mark making, which you guys have been practicing for the last couple of classes now. All right, in order for weighted line to show up and be visible, you need to have value contrast. You need to have line contrast. So we are going to have some areas that have thick lines, some areas that have thin lines. All right, so you can see here's one example that I've worked on already where I started to add some weight, some heaviness to some of the lines. Notice I didn't go over every single line. I don't want it to all be the same. I want there to be some variation in order to begin to bring some importance to, again, some of the lines themselves. All right, areas where you have lines that converge or meet, that's a good place to work some of the weighted line. Areas that overlap are also a really easy place to start working in some value and some weighted line as well. And then anywhere that you need to add sort of a natural groundedness to, and I'm going to be working into my camera here. So if you need to give it a visual weight, almost like it has a sense of gravity pulling upon it, that would be another good place to use your weighted line. So for this assignment, you are going to need one of the example sheets. These are posted on Schoology. You'll need to print one of them out is the best way to work. If you don't have the ability to print, you're just simply going to need to look at the examples, draw them in your sketchbook first, and then do the weighted line process. All right, you're also going to need your fat Sharpie marker that you got at the beginning of the year. And then if you have one of the skinny Sharpie markers, this is your best bet as far as creating the thinness of the line. All right, so I'm going to work into my camera here and start to establish some of the weighted line. So to make this a little bit easier to see, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back over some of my, sorry, I get my Sharpie marker to work here. I'm going to go over some of my skinny lines with the Sharpie because they are basically the same thickness of line. So I'm just using this as a way to help make the lines a little bit easier to see and to follow. And you'll see why here in just a second. All right, so I work just in this area here to start with, and you're probably not seeing a ton of difference because the skinny Sharpie marker and the lines that were there that were printed are pretty much the same. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to add my weight. So for this lens, I want to add sort of a visual weight down at the bottom portion of this rounded area, almost like the camera was sort of sitting somewhere. So I'm going to go back into my drawing and begin to start to thicken some of the line. Now you'll notice as I begin to work into this, I'm not tracing around the whole thing, okay? Remember, in order to have weighted lines show up, I need to have contrast. I need to have some areas that are going to be thick and some areas that are going to remain thin. All right, so you can see here already I've begun to build up some of the line weight in this area here. Again, starting to establish some contrast. All right, now I have this area at the top where all those lines kind of converge together, so I'm going to go in and build some value and some weight to that area as well to begin to give that some emphasis. Now, each time that I'm working with my Sharpie marker, I do not want to make a line that is sort of stable and stagnant and the exact same thickness every time. What I do want to do is start to get into the practice of what we call a stroke. okay, or almost like painting on the line, where we start by having a consistent line and then it just kind of fades away. So I'm almost lifting my Sharpie marker as I go. So creating this little sort of tail and variation is one of the ways that line weight can be established fairly quick. Okay, again, it's almost like we're sort of brushing that line on. Now, as we start to work our way through our objects that are on the sheet, periodically what you should do is flip to the back of your page. Okay, and as you're creating this where you're creating this weighted line, because we're working on a thinner paper and we have the Sharpie marker, it's going to bleed through. We actually want that. Okay, when you look onto your assignment, you're going to see that your submission for this piece and the second component is going to be to post the back of your paper. Okay, so I actually want to see this image here that gets rid of all the kind of printed extra so that I can just see where you've worked back in to develop the use of your weighted line. So again, in order to have this work, we need to have some areas that are thick, some areas that are thin, so that when we're seeing it from the back, we're seeing that contrast, we're seeing those comparisons. So here are a few other examples. This is one of the other images that are posted on Schoology for you to choose from. This is the front, this is the back, so you can begin to see the contrast that's created in some of the curvatures. Again, here in through the flower. So we're creating value in line. And then the other example, the paintbrush, the pepper, and the pumpkin. When we flip that over, this is the back. So again, you're seeing the contrast in the line, okay, having some areas thick, some areas thin, in order to begin to add some visual interest. Okay, so this is the weighted line portion of the assignment. The other thing that you're going to be working on is the application of your mark making onto an image. So we're going to incorporate in those value drawings, those valued examples that you had previously, and we're going to start working those and incorporating in the usage of our mark making in order to, again, work with establishing the value. So what I've done in the image, and I have two sort of examples, so I'm actually going to start with this one here. What you're going to do is you're going to work back into your image. You're going to already have your grid lines drawn. So the easiest thing to do is to establish a 5x5 area by simply counting your blocks. Okay, remember, we did a 1-inch grid, so all you need to do is go in and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the opposite direction, in order to create your 5x5 area that you're going to work into. Okay, you only need to work this mark making application into that 5x5 space. Okay, everything else can just kind of go by the wayside for right now. All right, once you've established your 5x5 area, then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your skinny Sharpie marker and you're going to use at least one of your mark making techniques. If you choose to work with more than one, you certainly can. But you're going to go back into this image and first off, start to establish the darker areas in your composition. Okay, so I'm just going back in, I'm using stippling here, so I'm going right back on top of the image as I start to create my series of marks. Notice that I did not take my Sharpie marker and go and draw any contour line. I'm just working with mark here, so starting to create my stippling to show my dark areas. Right, I could come over here into this sort of dark shadowed area of the eye. And again, I'm going to start to drop in my stippling. That's my chosen mark. All right, now it might be a little bit difficult for you guys to see on the screen as I'm dropping this onto the existing value. All right, but again, what you're going to do periodically is flip to the back of your image. Okay, and as you do that, the parts that you work into as they start to bleed through are going to begin to show the image like you see on the front, except for this time it's all going to be defined by the marks that you select. Now, the one little roadblock that we kind of run into with this is sometimes, depending on the printed image, sometimes the ink that was used to print this can already have or be a little bit sort of thick on the paper, if you will. So sometimes no matter how many marks I make into an area, especially these areas that are really dark, no matter how many marks I make into this area, it sometimes doesn't seem like it gets dark enough. So I'm going to switch over to my second example here and flip it over. So you can see that this one's a little bit more established. And I have these darker areas, especially here, that when I was working on the front, it just wouldn't get dark enough. So I flipped it to the back, and then I can continue to add marks here, especially if you have areas where the Sharpie marker just won't bleed through enough. Okay, so here I'm going to go in again using my mark making technique. So I haven't switched, I haven't started to draw my edges or anything like that. I'm establishing my edges, but I'm doing it through the use of mark. Okay, so here I'm going back, and again, I would need to continuously add my stippling in order to begin to develop the values that I needed. Right? And I did the same process in other areas of this 5x5 block. When I was on the front, I started to establish some of the darker areas that were underneath of the lip. I can come in and create this stippled edge of the chin that I'm going to need to develop value-wise a little bit as we go. And again, as I start to add mark, what I want to do is I want to flip this over, check the back in order to see the marks that I produce. So I just created this edge here with those that series of stipples. So if I needed to, I can go back later and make it darker either on the front or on the back. So when you're all finished, you should end up having basically the front of your sheet here, your example, but in this time with the value laid out using the mark versus using well-blended value like you did before. Right, so this will kind of help us to, again, kind of round out our value series where we've worked with practicing value scales, we've worked with some gradations, you've worked with mark making to create value, now incorporating in this use of weighted line in order to create value in the drawing itself. And then eventually what we'll do is we'll start working at pulling all of this information together, whether it's blended value, mark making value, or line value. We're going to pull that all together into a finalized piece.